Hey everybody, we have to talk about this RFK Jr. guy again. This man recently dismissed basically the entire ACIP committee, which is the committee responsible for recommending vaccine schedules. Let's talk about why this is absolutely unreasonable. The ACIP has made some mistakes in the past, particularly during the COVID era, but who hasn't really? And that was a very unique situation. I do believe that that was a combination of a lot of things, including pressure from the executive branch. But we learned, we adapted, and we moved on. That's how science works. But what RFK Jr. just did, erasing institutional memory by firing the entire committee, makes it impossible to learn from past mistakes. Process doesn't come from purges, it comes from reflection, it comes from accountability, and then improvement. By firing the whole committee, RFK Jr. didn't just disrupt that system, he erased the very people who understood how to make it better. And as a response to the public, he posted this gigantic tweet trying to justify his reasoning behind such a radical change. So please stick with me. Let me go through it with you so I can explain. In the first paragraph, he mentions that he's gotten rid of the ACIP members, of course, and will not replace them with ideological anti-vaxxers. I hope that's obvious, and it's unusual that he would have to say that he's not appointing anti-vaxxers to a vaccine recommendation committee, but I think that's going to happen anyway. And he says that these individuals will be highly credentialed physicians who apply evidence-based decision-making with objectivity and common sense. And we'll get to this common sense later. And here comes the part of his message that exaggerates information and is a complete misunderstanding of science. He begins with a statement that an American child receives between 69 to 92 routine vaccines from birth to 18 years of age, which is up from 11 in 1986. This is a two-part double whammy. 92 sounds a bit high, and 69 seems a bit more reasonable, but let's just count it up from the CDC immunization schedule. Here we have it. 50 shots. Not quite 92 or 69. It would only make sense if he was counting combination shots, like an MMR vaccine would count as 3 vaccines. Technically is, I guess, but he specifically mentioned extra jabs, so I'm not really sure what he actually means. The second part of it is that he mentions it's up from 11 shots in 1986, and I think most of us would agree that in the last 40 years, there would be some improvement in medicine. Of course, there's more vaccines. I think that's a bit of common sense. And if we talk about the amount of viral load or antigens in the older vaccines versus now, well, it's a different story. If you take smallpox, for instance, which is the variola virus, and Dr. Paul Offit talks about this too, the variola virus is one of the biggest mammalian viruses out there. It's so big that you could see it with a regular microscope. You usually need an electron microscope to see viruses. The smallpox vaccine had 200 antigens on its own. The whole cell pertussis vaccine, part of the old DTP vaccine, contained more than 3,000 bacterial proteins. Today's vaccine schedule includes more individual vaccines, but thanks to advances in technology like recombinant DNA and subunit vaccines, they contain far fewer antigens. Modern DTaP, the updated pertussis vaccine, contains only 3 to 5 antigens. MMR, Hib, hepatitis B, etc. all use highly purified proteins or killed virus particles. Total antigen exposure today by age 2 is around 150 to 160 antigens, which is 95% fewer than 40 years ago. So his argument there isn't grounded by any realistic conclusion. Like, why would fewer gigantic vaccines be better than covering more stuff with less medicine? Kind of meaningless facts. Next, he shows how unaware he is of how science actually works, but he thinks he knows it, referencing himself as a science geek. The claim that no routine injected vaccine on CDC schedule was licensed for children based on placebo-controlled trial is demonstrably false. And I think that's because he doesn't know what a placebo is, or rather, I know he doesn't know what a placebo is.
Anything I give you would only be a placebo.
Where did we get these placebos?
Maybe there's some in this truck.
He's using his quote-unquote common sense, in which case the placebo should be something akin to nothing at all. His reference specifically is saline water. And why does he think that? Well, he provides a link for why he thinks that. And if you click this link, it will bring up a PDF for the use of placebos in cancer trials. Cancer is much, much different than vaccine trials. We have very sick people with often very few effective treatments, very healthy people that we're trying to protect and don't want to get sick. Let's start with vaccines. Many vaccines are tested against an existing vaccine, active comparator, because there's already a standard of care in place. If we use an inert placebo, that would mean denying participants something we know that works against potentially serious infectious diseases, which is unethical. For example, if we're testing a new pertussis vaccine, you ethically can't withhold DTaP from the control group because pertussis can be deadly. We're not out to see if the vaccine does something. The technology is based on previous effective vaccines, so we know it does something. We want to know if it's better than its predecessors or at least not worse. And then on the cancer side, in cancer trials, participants often don't have an effective treatment available, especially in those late stage or aggressive cancers. Therefore, it is ethical, much like his example, to compare against an inert placebo because there's no standard of care to withhold. But even in oncology, if there is a standard treatment, trials typically use that treatment as the comparator, not a placebo. And he would know this if he read his own link. All of this is actually mentioned in the link he provided. In developmental programs for malignant cancers, the use of a placebo in a double-blind randomized controlled clinical trial may present practical and ethical concerns. This directly confirms that placebos aren't automatically used in cancer trials. In fact, the FDA warns of ethical issues, the same issues that apply to vaccine trials when effective vaccines already exist. For patients with hematologic malignancies and oncologic diseases that have standard therapy available, using a placebo, not an active treatment, generally would not be considered ethical. This mirrors vaccine trial design. Once the vaccine is proven effective, it becomes the comparator, not saline. We don't take treatment away just to get a cleaner control. One such active control superiority trial design option is to conduct an open label trial with a physician's choice of one of a few standard therapies as the comparator. This is exactly what vaccine trials do when updating or testing new formulations. They compare against another vaccine, not saline, because standard therapy exists. Sponsors should provide the rationale for the trial design when there is an available therapy or when a placebo is given as monotherapy and not combined with an active drug or drugs. In other words, placebos like salines are only justified when no effective treatment exists or when added to an existing treatment. However, despite his own evidence, he is fully focused that all vaccines he lists need to be compared to an inert substance. Now, this part is silly too. While the above addresses injected vaccines, CNN's cited list of placebo-controlled trials also includes 10 trials for rotavirus given by oral drops, but none of these trials used saline-only drops. Now, oral vaccines don't just contain the virus itself, it also contains things like amino acids, sugars, emulsifiers, things that might cause side effects on their own. If you gave a saline placebo, you'd be unable to tell whether a side effect was caused by the actual virus or by other ingredients. Also, if I gave you just straight up saline water, aka salt water, you might be able to suspect that all I gave you was salt water. And if people can tell which group they're in because the placebo is just saline and the vaccine is thicker, sweeter, or bitter, you lose the integrity of the trial. The FDA and other regulatory bodies require blinding whenever possible to reduce bias. This, again, comes from his own source. Blinding investigators and patients in these trials allows for unbiased observation of outcome measures. Using a placebo that mimics the vaccine formulation without the active virus preserves blinding while maintaining safety. And he also uses a correlation causation fallacy. Using the rise in chronic conditions as proof of vaccine harm is intellectually lazy. Chronic illness has increased for many reasons: better diagnostics, environmental changes, increased awareness, longer lifespans, among other things. The vaccine schedule is one of the most studied health interventions in the entire world, over and over and over again. Real epidemiological data have found no causal link between vaccines and the explosion of chronic illness. Now, to be honest, it gets really exhausting going through his claims, and I think whoever's fact-checking his messages needs to do a better job too. These kinds of posts are dangerous. It uses scientific jargon just enough to sound credible, but most people don't have the time to fact check every claim or read an entire tweet thread. If you don't know who RFK Jr. is, or you're not already skeptical, it's easy to start believing the false premises baked into messages like this. I wanted to call him an imbecile. I really do. But honestly, the real issue is that most people, including RFK Jr. himself, aren't scientifically trained, and we can't expect everyone to know how vaccine trials work or understand the nuances of immunology. But if you're going to speak with authority on these topics, especially with this kind of reach, you have to be qualified. You have to understand the science. I'm not saying you should blindly believe every doctor or every scientist, but we should expect people in leadership, especially those weighing in on public health, to be credentialed and competent. And we as healthcare providers need to do a better job explaining this stuff in a way people can actually understand. RFK Jr. has a massive platform, and when he spreads misinformation like this, the only effective response is for all of us to step up. We need to talk to our friends, our families, our communities, correct the record, share the truth, and make science accessible. So please don't let this go unchallenged. Push back, share this video, talk about it. Be louder than the misinformation.